So hello, and a very warm welcome to you all to this very special edition of the RFS Book Club. I am Wendy Necar. I'm the Communications Officer for the Royal Forestry Society. And with me today is James Canton, author of the wonderful Oak Papers, which I hope many of you will have read. It's a book which charts James's fascination, initially with a wonderful old species called the Honywood Oak. Apologies, James, for that. And then his continuing discovery of the people who work with oak, the people who have loved oaks and revered oaks over the past, and really an exploration of what oak means to us all today. So just before you say hello, James, I'm just going to tell people a little bit about you. Bear with me. James is a senior lecturer at the Department of Theatre, Film and, oh, sorry, I've got that one wrong, Literature, Film and Theatre Studies at the University of Essex. And he has taught on the MA in Wild Writing since its inception. James, moving to you now. I know
Hi.
that this,
Nice to see you, Wendy.
Book, thank you. So this book emerged from what was a low point in your life. And I know it's been described variously as a meditative book and a healing book. And I think that many people, as we've gone through the COVID crisis, will relate to that as they themselves have turned to nature. So perhaps you could start by telling us what led you to the Honywood Oak and where it all began, and whether you have some pictures you could perhaps start to share with us.
Yeah, sure, Wendy. Thank you very much for the kind introduction. It's very, very sweet of you. It's nice to be here, I have to say, even if, you know, be here kind of changes its meaning. But yeah, I mean, I began this book, you know, quite a few years ago now, it has to be said. The Oak Papers kind of began as just a kind of project that I thought would be really nice to do in terms of me going and sitting beside an ancient oak tree, which I'm sure, you know, many people can kind of appreciate. At the time, I was actually teaching in a secondary school very close to the Honywood Oak. The Honywood Oak sits on a lovely small English estate, small English country estate called the Marks Hall Estate in Coggeshall, in Essex, in North Essex, where I live. And I just decided one day, and it literally was, I thought, well, it was sort of on my way home. And I thought, you know what, I'd just pop in and maybe just go and sit by this tree, and maybe it could be the start of a kind of longer, more kind of in-depth project of kind of getting to know as much as anything, the kind of community of the oak, the biodiversity, if you like. So I spoke to the person who was in charge, who went under the title of Curator of Trees, which is particularly gorgeous title, I thought. A guy called Jonathan Jukes. He's moved on since and now works for the Woodland Trust. He's absolutely phenomenal knowledge of trees, not surprisingly. And obviously, I slightly oddly, in certain ways, I think I approached him with this idea that I would come and sit by the Honywood Oak, this 800-year-old oak tree, at various times of the day and the night, and you know, through the seasons. You know, initially I said, you know, it would need to be at least a year, and I just kind of want to sit there and write about it. And I
what was his
kind of half thought he might. Yeah, I thought he might just say.
He might say, "Whoa."
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I mean, exactly. And Jonathan was really cool. He doesn't sometimes doesn't speak too much, like all the best wood folk, and he just kind of like nodded a little bit. I really remember the conversation, and then he just went, "Yeah, that sounds really good." And it was a brilliant thing, because, as you say, I was going through the breakup of a long-term relationship, and I think, you know, I have to say at the time I didn't really put it in that context, but it quite swiftly became a place that I could go to where, you know, any kind of like negativity, any kind of like difficulty in my life just kind of evaporated, if you like. It was a place where I just felt a lot of joy and a lot of real excitement of being kind of tucked into the natural world. But as you say, I have got some images, so I mean that might be the the
Well,
kinder
just before
way.
we move to those, I'm just going to move to a quote that you said, and I think that really encapsulates what you've just said. Right at the beginning of the book, you say, I felt a peace envelop me every time I stepped onto the country estate where the oak tree lived. You know, it wasn't there, but the oak tree lived. It was its home, and I thought that was lovely, and that peace enveloping you was fantastic. And I know you're about to give us a reading from right from those early days. So perhaps we could have some pictures as well of the Honywood Oak. That would be great.
Let me try and get my screen share working for you. So, I mean, essentially, as I say, the project was really about not trying to do too much. If there was a figure I had in mind, it would be Gilbert White, who I was kind of studying and reading at the time. And I'd started teaching this MA in wild writing at the University of Essex. And I just wanted to go and sit really and observe in the same way that kind of White did back in the 18th century, and just really kind of make notes, slightly old school practice of just getting to know the tree and the kind of wider community around it. So let me introduce you. This is the Honywood Oak. As you can
that's
see,
the first time I've seen.
In winter,
I'm going to call it her. Actually, that's the first time I've seen her. I don't know if you have a feeling on.
You know, that's people have asked me if I thought there was a kind of that kind of aspect. I never really kind of related to the tree in that way. It was a kind of entity. Definitely, there was a kind of living being there, which I kind of recognized quite quickly. Suddenly realized that trees are these living things, and they, in many ways, they kind of, we can form relationships with them. But yeah, I mean, you know, the essential thing was really to go to the tree kind of at different times of the year. So as you can see, this was sort of my practice, and you might be able to notice there's the odd bench around this oak. And I would kind of go and sit on a bench, often literally with a pile of books half the time that would largely remain unopened, a pair of binoculars, notepad, you know, the voice memos, you know, the modern accoutrements of note taking, and in all the seasons as well. So there was this sense of kind of really getting to know the life cycle. And as I say, obviously also observing the life around the oak. And there was some stunning, beautiful moments. I often would go, and you could probably just about make out on the right-hand side there, there's a sort of a place where you could just kind of tuck down by the tree. And often I kind of needed to, because you got some quite cold winds coming through at different times. And that in some ways, I think, there was a kind of intimacy in that sense of kind of connecting with this living tree, this ancient living tree. And obviously, you know, the sense of being there at these kind of key moments in the year was always very, very powerful, you know, and was very much a kind of sense of all the different times, not just the times that were easy for me, but the times that would allow me to relate to the different aspects of the tree's life, I think. You know,
well, I think seeing the tree after reading about it for so long is absolutely lovely. So thank you for those pictures.
No, you're more than welcome. It's a gorgeous tree, and it is still very much alive and very much sitting there on the Marksall estate. If people want to go and visit, it's a stunning place to go and visit, and it is open to the public. Yeah,
we'll come back to that. I've had a specific question about that a little bit later on.
Okay,
so maybe we'll come back to that one. So yes, you were going to give us a quick reading, I think, from pages of people who are following this on pages 4 and 5 of the book.
Sure, thanks, Wendy. Yeah. I mean, one of the things, just to introduce the reading, one of the things I recognized fairly early on in my kind of, as I was sitting by the tree, obviously when I left, I would do more and more research into the tree, the nature of oak trees, the prehistory of humans and trees and oak trees around the world. And I hadn't recognized how much oak trees were were really significant post-Ice Age for kind of human existence. So I think this sort of opening paragraphs in the beginnings just sort of frames the book to a certain extent. Wherever oak trees grow around the globe, people have developed a connection to them. Throughout human history, particular oaks have been favored for their setting, for their age and size. Ancient oaks have always been special. People collect beneath their boughs. They may gather there as a place of significance within the landscape, or merely as somewhere to shelter. Whereas we humans are creatures of movement, oaks are static beings. They do not shift. They are born and they die on the same patch of earth. It is that sure-footedness that is so appealing. Ancient oaks hold a powerful sense of longevity, the sense of security, the sense of attachment to a place across time enchants us. We are drawn to old oaks. You can stand beneath a grand oak and know that your more distant ancestors did so too. Oaks hold on to the memories of earlier generations. By touching the skin of the oak, it is possible to feel some tentative trace of those that have gone before. Human beings and oaks have lived beside one another as neighbors since the earliest times, and we continue to do so. We no longer need the bodies of oak trees to build our homes or to fuel our fires. And we no longer need acorns to sustain us through hard years and meager harvests. Yet on some level, we still lean on oak trees. In ways we do not fully understand, we need them.
Oh, thank you for that, James. It really is wonderful. And that's one of the topics that I'd like to pick up, is that feeling of enchantment and spiritualism. And there's so much in the book that I think if we can just structure our discussions around the themes of spiritualness, joyfulness, and then perhaps look at the biodiversity that's come out of your years with them, and at the different peoples, ancient and modern. And then perhaps just we'll look a little bit ahead to what the future might hold from what you have felt yourself.
Sure.
So let's start with the spiritual. And I don't know whether you had this feeling, but as I was reading it, I got this very sense of purpose as you walked down to the oak. It was like there was a routine, almost a pilgrimage to the oak. Yeah. Almost as though the getting there was as important as the being there. Did that sort of, am I picking up something completely?
No, I think you're absolutely right, Wendy. I think that's absolutely right. And I think people can appreciate this, that, you know, I've had a lot of conversations with people who sort of say, oh, my favorite tree is like, it's just down the road and you have to walk around here. And then, and you're absolutely right. There's a sense of a kind of a journey. And part of the journey is then the arrival, and part of it is getting there, if you like.
The anticipation, perhaps of, yes.
I think that's absolutely right. No, I think you're absolutely right. And I, you know, in the book, I speak to various people along the way, if you like, in the journey of the book, about the you know, particularly that sense. You know, I was really intrigued by the fact that I was genuinely, you know, and I think people can relate to this, I genuinely felt a kind of peace and a calm when I was sat beside that ancient oak tree, that I, you know, wasn't necessarily feeling in all parts of my life at that time. And I was kind of like, what, you know, why is this? So I spoke to a, environmental psychologist at one point, Mike Rogerson, you know, colleague of mine. And exactly, he said, you know, part of it is this sort of journey, and, you know, you can anticipate that things will be a better place when you are sat beside that tree, and you're almost literally kind of preparing yourself to get into a better space. So that's absolutely right. And I think, as you say, in the last 18 months or so, I think we've all been reminded of that practice that the natural world can do. to us in terms of offering this kind of meditative space or place for us to go to and to kind of step out of our more humanized worlds, if you like.
Yeah. You very nicely sort of call on that wonderful Davis poem, and you're going to be able to say it much better than I can say it. But what is life if full of care? We have no time to stand and stare. So I'm going to ask you to say it in a much better prose, but have you learnt to stand and stare? And what has that brought to you, do you think?
Yeah, it's a beautiful poem, isn't it? It was it's a poem that's really important to me. It was my dad's favorite poem, and he was never, I wouldn't say he was a big kind of poetry guy, if you know what I mean. Yeah, I mean, the poem, W.H. Davies is an amazing guy. He was a kind of, he's known as the super tramp in many ways, because he was a kind of down and out, really, and an incredible figure in many ways. I mean, he lost his leg in a sort of train accident in the States, and was picked up, kind of looked after to a certain extent by Bernard Shaw. Anyway, but yeah, the poem, what is this life if full of care? We have no time to stand and stare, no time to sit beneath the boughs and stare as long as sheep or cows. And it kind of goes on in the same sort of gentle pace. And he was very much an advocate of this. And you could see there's this sort of sense of the romantic wanderer in there, which I think it's quite appealing. But particularly that idea of just, sitting beneath the boughs and staring as long as sheep as cows, that, which is that same kind of old school naturalist practice of just sitting and observing the aspects of the natural world, and recognizing that we as humans are of nature. We are part of the natural world, and that will happen if we're sitting beneath an oak tree, or if we're sitting in a room that we've constructed, and that is very much our role, that we are just a bit of the natural world. And I think often this dividing between the two isn't helpful. And I think perhaps when we sit beneath boughs and don't try and rush around or answer our mobile phones or something, we recognize that intimacy of connection as of being an integral part of the natural world, if you like.
And does it take a little bit of confidence to step out of our busy modern world to do that? Usually we're en route, we're perhaps on a walk, it might be a walk admiring the nature, but we still tend to say, oh, that's lovely, and walk on by, don't we?
Yeah, I mean, I think, I don't know about a kind of confidence. I think it does take a certain practice. I think you're right. I think, it's one of those things where we can kind of learn from the way that children act. They tend to be less time bound, particularly if they're say out in the natural world. If you've got them outdoors, got them off their screens, you've done that big tick, and then you go out and suddenly, what they want to do is get a stick and start picking up stones and, going to the woods and climbing trees and this kind of thing. And if you can kind of, I think partly there is exactly that, the kind of stripping off of these aspects of ourselves in a kind of human constructed landscape and stepping into the more natural landscape. We very quickly, I think, well, I mean, I know this because the environmental psychologists will tell us this, that we go into what are known as meditative states. I mean, that's what the scientists call it, as opposed to the stressed states that we're in if we're in our human world, if you like, which is quite dramatic, I think.
Well, we're talking very much about the oak papers, and I know that obviously it's the Honywood Oak, but what if it had been the Honywood Willow or the Honywood Yew? You'd have had perhaps a very different book. Do you think you'd have had the same connectivity to the tree species?
Yeah, I don't. It's a very good question. I mean, as I say, there are once you do the research, there are very, very strong historical, prehistoric connections between oaks. And there are 500 species of oaks around the world, between oaks and humans. And we know that in kind of in hunter-gatherer times, in early farming times, those times of the early Neolithic, all around wherever oaks grew, they were a very important source of wood for shelter, for fire, but also of acorns, this kind of fairly guaranteed harvest of food at a time where, as humans, we were moving at various times, different parts of the world, from hunter-gatherer to more kind of farming subsistence. And those acorns were really useful to allow us to get over some bad times. I mean, there's really interesting archaeological stuff about, finding like huge pits. There's a famous one just outside Berlin where acorns of this is from prehistory, early Neolithic, where the acorns have all been prepared. They have to be washed, cleaned, etc., to get the tannins out, and they're already there. There's this kind of store
ready to go. Yeah,
which obviously doesn't take place with other trees to the same extent. So I don't know if there, as you say, if it was a huge willow, would I have formed an attachment? Quite possibly, but it would have been a different book, because willow has got a very different connection with humans. As we know, like yew trees, for example, have very strong kind of spiritual, cultural connections. And there's certainly a lovely book to be written about yew trees. I mean,
maybe the next one.
Well, a number of people have done that. Richard Mabey, for example, knows his yews. But yeah, I think it's a really good point. I mean, one of the great woodmen around these parts, sadly lost recently, Richard Fordham, who I talked to in the book on a couple of occasions. He's very, very good guide. He said to me his favorite tree was a willow. So different trees for different people or something.
Absolutely. And I think so many of us, oak has a feeling of being reliable, doesn't it? It's part of our DNA almost. I think almost everybody can recognize an oak tree.
It's very interesting that one of the things that when I approached the subject, I kind of thought, well, oaks, they're have English oaks, it's a very English thing. It's our national identity, British connections with, and you start looking into it. It's yes, okay, the oak is strongly connected largely with British naval history and kind of colonial history. The HMS Victory was made up of 6,000 trees, 90% of which were oaks. This kind of vision, but it's also the national tree of Germany, Latvia, America. This sort of wider sense that all around the world, where there are oaks, they are very strongly connected with the humans that live there. I thought that was fascinating as I kind of delved into it.
So I'm going to take you back a little bit to childhood almost, or joyfulness. Let's call it joyfulness. So although that you started visiting the oak really as a way of escaping from some of your own sorrows and perhaps melancholy at the time, there were moments where I absolutely smiled and thought, I know that. And one of those moments was when you describe how you're huddling underneath the drip line of the tree, and it's making little puddles in the snow. And then you tuck yourself into the tree trunk, and then eventually you start and you're brave enough and you do an assisted climb up the Honywood Oak. And then as we move through the book, you actually climb the 2 oak trees. And I was interested in that sort of, was that your own confidence rebuilding, your life rebuilding as you did that? And had you stood beneath a drip line as a child? Did that bring back those sorts of memories to you? Because it certainly did for me.
Really, that's funny. That's really nice, Wendy. Yeah. I mean, I think there was that's a really good question, and lots of layers to it as much as anything. As a child, I certainly spent a lot of time in a pear tree in our garden in London. I mean, not all the time. I was mainly kicking a ball about, to be honest, or throwing a ball or digging holes, that kind of thing. But yeah, I mean, with the Honywood Oak, the Jonathan Jukes, who, as I say, was curator of trees at the time, was very kind at kind of helping me, enabling me rather, to get into this tree. And I've got some images actually that we can possibly look at.
Lovely.
That also kind of fit with that idea. Let me just, I'll just get them up for us. Yeah, so it's a big tree. It's a big tree, and as I think we were talking about, there were various aspects of the kind of biodiversity, if you like, of this tree that fascinated me. The honeycomb that came from the wild bees that were there. These various bits and pieces, what I kind of started to think of as oak objects that I started to collect, which is very much what you were sort of saying about that sort of almost like childish or childlike joy that you get from kind of hanging around the tree, and kind of being, as you say, being at the drip line, and this sort of sense of, I don't know, kind of excitement at the most incredible little objects that you're kind of picking up and seeing and delving into. I did a lot of kind of gazing into the bark and recognizing that there were a number of insects and various creatures that lived only on oaks. This was a remarkable thing. In 2,300 creatures, of various types are connected with the oak tree, are reliant on. And I'm not sure if this is, but there was one called the Stiletto Fly that I was particularly interested in, that kind of lived in the heart rot of the tree. But yeah, as you say, the idea of getting up into the oak, I mean, that gives you a certain idea. We had to go up with a ladder. I had to have a kind of professional arboriculturalist to kind of guide me in, because it's a big tree. This is a big tree. It's sort of best part of 30 feet around in diameter. I wanted to get up and sit in the bowl and just kind of spend some time there and just watch the blue tits feeding and this kind of thing. And we did get up there. The guy I was with, I think this was Simon, it might have been Ian, went up twice. I was very fortunate. Was far more into the idea of going to the limits of the tree to the top. I was quite happy at about whatever it was, 25 feet or something, and just hanging out there and just spending some time in that other aspect of the tree, being in the tree, which is again, as we all know, and again from our sort of childhood days, it's a very thing, actually climbing a tree and then being in the tree, and that's it's a remarkable thing. And you get a slight sense of the height. Obviously, this was taken by me rather than Ian / Simon, who went up sort of 100 foot or so. But you get that idea. And then, as you say, what I started to do was recognize that there were other oaks in this world. And this is Two Oak Hill, down near my home, about a mile away. And the oak on the right-hand side is particularly good as a climbing tree. And I started to go into this tree and deliberately kind of go and spend time there, and very much found that was another aspect to this practice that I was kind of stepping into, if you like, really, of being in the oak. And again, it was remarkably kind of calming and meditative to actually sit in the oak tree, if you like.
I think at this point we perhaps ought to issue a little health warning that responsible tree climbing only, please, to those listening to this. But
yes,
there was a moment, and I think we're coming to that in a second, with a quote where you have a moment of realization that there you are, a grown man climbing a tree, sitting in a tree, and there are others around walking their dogs, walking their children. And you have a moment thinking, gosh, what on earth are they going to think if they walk past me? So I don't know, are you able to read us that passage?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely, Wendy. Yeah, that's absolutely right. And hopefully I'm not alone with this, that you can be in your own kind of like sort of more reflective kind of meditative state of being, if you like, which I would try to get. I mean, not try to, but often you just did if you went and sat by an oak tree. But as you say, then the everyday would kind of continue around you. Yeah, absolutely. So this is from a diary entry in August. I rise early and long to step into the oak. So I clear my work and walk the road to Two Oak Hill. The sun is already hot, buzzards high and mewing. The moon hangs half full in a cloud of pale brushed wisps. Before the meadow, I stop to watch two buzzards, which crisscross every few seconds as they rise together before me. An audience of martins and swallows flies below them. The staghorn of the oak seems to have grown larger, though I know this cannot be. Yet more of the dead wood can certainly be seen, as though the tree is rising up from the sandy soils, reaching from its roots into the wonder of the firmament beyond. The oak looks magnificent, a wild beast standing proud upon the brow of the hill, looking out to the north, gazing over the meadows and fields and trees. I feel the shudder of a snake in the long grass. I step up the hill and then on, up the bough ladder to my familiar seat within the stag-headed oak. Yet no sooner have I settled there in that sylvan seat than I hear human voices from the east, and something in them spooks me as before. And so I start to climb down, afraid somewhere deep inside of what they may think or say or do on finding a man there within an oak tree. I clamber back to earth, yet once there, the voices seem to have vanished, and I'm half a mind to head back up. I stare into the oak, and the thought comes to me that if the same is to happen the next time, that I shall instead not clamber down, but climb higher into the oak, and so hide from human voices and eyes up there within the leaves and branches of the tree. Tempting. Tempting.
It's a fabulous reading. Thank you, James. And there are two things that come to mind. One, of course, is Charles II hiding in his oak tree up in Staffordshire in Baskerville. And I think that, I don't know whether school children are still taught that, but that was one which certainly, again, a childhood memory that you rekindled there.
Good.
And then a question for you, really. That was written some time ago. Are you still climbing trees, and have you yet been found and discovered in one?
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. I actually do still go to Two Oak Hill, and I do every now and again I climb, and I did it was probably about 2 weeks ago. I was just over that way. It's a really beautiful little area, and I thought, I haven't been up the stag-headed oak for a while, so I just climbed up. It's a very easy climb. I'm not like a super Bear Grylls climber or something, but and I was sitting up there, and in fact, for the first time, I kind of didn't notice, and before I could climb down in time, there was a dog walker almost literally beneath me, walking with her dog, and I just sat there, and she didn't notice me at all, and I think the dog just didn't. I'm not sure if the dog knew there was me there, but just kind of was a bit like, there's something not quite right here, which was quite sweet, and just barked a little and then walked on. So yeah, I'm pleased to have kind of done that. Actually, I am pleased to have stayed there.
So having been within the tree, has that sort of brought, we saw the pictures from the Honywood tree. Does it bring you a different perspective of life? What is it that climbing the tree brings you that sitting down with your back against it doesn't? What's the difference there between those two approaches?
Yeah, it's a good point, and I think it's some sort of intuitive sense, isn't it? When you do that, I mean, you are literally held within the tree, and there's that sense. There's a genuine sense that the tree and you are far more fundamentally connected, if you like. But there's also that sense, I think, that there's, you're just there. That is it. And it's very present tense, of course. So you become very present. There's no, I have occasionally kind of gone into reverie, but you don't tend to, because you're sitting on a branch 15 foot up, and that tends to keep you very much in the present tense. I find. I think there is that sense, and I think there's also you are within a different realm of the tree. So particularly at that kind of early feeding time of the blue tits, for example, very, very powerful if you can be sat up there and just there long enough that everything becomes used to you, and you're just part of the furniture, and then you've got an incredible experience, I think.
So while we're on the subject of birds, there was one point, and I can't remember whether this was when you were actually sitting under or in the tree, but you're spotting tree creepers, which I used to see regularly and haven't seen for a number of years. And I had a huge sense of envy, really, that you'd had the time to sit back and do that. A privilege, really, to do that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, this was at the Honywood Oak, and I was actually just sat right by the tree. It stood right by the tree on a burr, and so with my back against the tree, and a tree creeper, as you say, just flew right, like really about 2 feet from my head into a fissure in the bark where it had a nest, and I just, and I was just stood there for a period of time, for a few minutes as they both kind of came backwards and forwards, or I think they both did. I'm not that good on my tree creepers, but I'd seen them before doing their kind of classic thing of kind of tailing around the tree, collecting insects, but I've certainly never been that close to them before, and it was a really magical moment.
So you've touched on the sort of biodiversity of the tree and what you've seen. And at one point there was, I think it was you and Jonathan Jukes were shaking off the boughs and getting all a selection of insects down. Was it a surprise to you? Did it come as a surprise to you how much is reliant on the beach, on the oak as a habitat?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I'm self-confessed from a kind of literary background, really. Largely that's my education in latter years. And, I'm not a kind of a scientist. I'm not an expert on the aspects of the tree, but I was reading books, obviously, as soon as I began sitting by the Honywood Oak. And this incredible diversity that exists within the community of the oak. Jonathan described it as like a kind of block of flats. And I think that's a really good way of seeing an ancient tree, because there are various beings living in various parts of this tree, and some of them can only live in the bit that's rotting out in the middle.
The rotten bit,
you don't really see. Some of them live on the outsidey bit. Some of them are only there for part of the year. And this incredible collection of creatures and lichens and fungi and all kinds of others. And that for me was very exciting. It was a very exciting aspect as I kind of sat there and learned. That process of learning by simple observation was wonderful. And Jonathan was great like that. It's a really good thing to do if you can be with someone who's more expert, or if you're learning and you're careful. Putting a white sheet under like a branch of the oak in say late spring, and just gently kind of knocking off some of the creatures so that you can see what's there, and then very carefully afterwards, obviously we were literally kind of putting little kind of pea colored spiders back onto the leaves, because that's their perfect camouflage, and then they don't get eaten. So it was a magical process. You
were also doing something which I've never even thought of doing, which was picking up little bits of wild honeycomb. I don't think I've ever found wild honeycomb, really? Or I've never identified it. I've never been aware that it could be there under a tree. I thought that was, again, a little bit of magic that you were finding coming out of the trees.
That was actually, I remember the first bit I found was on the day that we went up into the oak, and it very much did feel like a little bit of the tree kind of saying, this is okay, you can do this, without getting too mystical. But it was really lovely, and I've got about 3 pieces from that wild bee home in the oak, and they have slightly different kind of intensities of aroma, but they all still smell of honey in this kind of very kind of earthy, fecund smell. It's really lovely.
Okay, so I think now we'll move on to some of the wonderful people. You've mentioned Jonathan Jukes a few times, so if we give a name check out to some of the other amazing people you've met. There was the artist Stephen Taylor, the psychologist Mike Rogerson, who taught in some previous existence, I think.
Weirdly.
Dylan Pym, a furniture maker, and Stephen Westover and his wife Bella, I think, stood out. And I'll come to your friends Sarah Bevans in a moment, or Bevans, I don't know how you pronounce that.
Yeah, Bevans,
but they all had something surprising to tell you, didn't they? Or something which revealed itself to you as you were sort of searching for the heart of the oak, maybe.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, it's brilliant sort of approaching a subject that you kind of feel you know something about, and then it's such a complex and wide sphere of knowledge that, you know, there's the kind of cultural layering, everything from, you know, rereading Homer and recognizing that Odysseus, you know, had to hear the word of the, you know, the druids, if you like, who would hear from the susurrations of the oak trees at the Temple of Dodona, you know, 8th century written texts about oak trees, you know, and I did a certain amount, obviously, of that. But yeah, just speaking to various people that had these different ways in of knowledge into the oak. As you say, I mean, someone like Dylan Pym, I think, is he's, you know, fabulous guy, amazing furniture maker, you know, and he steam bends oak in order to create some incredible furniture. So he knows wood in a way that I don't, from the way that he literally physically works with it. But he's very sort of spiritual in a number of ways as well, and told about an ancient tree that he goes to near him that you can actually jump into.
Oh, I remember that bit. Yes, going into. Yeah, I think again, perhaps we ought to have a warning: don't jump inside the middle of an ancient
trees
oak
unless you know a way out. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And you know, and as you say, Mike Rogerson, who we've referenced before, he's an environmental psychologist, talking a little bit about, you know, the kind of the processes, the kind of mental states that can shift as you go into kind of woodland areas or places where you feel calmer, the natural world, etc.
I loved. I think didn't he tell you that the natural world is rounded and curved, and that's what helps to make us feel comfortable, and that our modern day lives tend to be angular and square and shaped.
Yeah, I mean,
I thought that was an interesting.
That's right.
Reflection.
This is an interesting observation, that if you think, for the vast majority of our existences as humans, we've lived not in straight lined landscapes, if you like, and it's only really been the last sort of couple of 100 years that we've created these worlds, and our we're not built for seeing this kind of thing, and it puts us into a stressed state. Literally, that's how the scientists see it, and very quickly, if you put humans back into a more natural environment, whether it be parkland in urban areas, and examine they're using, you know, various equipment, their EEG patterns, you can very easily see that humans drop back into these meditative states. Very interesting, very interesting.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of talk and research, isn't there? So hospitals are using trees outside windows to help people recover a bit better. Yeah. Certainly walking into woodland. It's a huge sort of issue that we're all just beginning perhaps to understand a little bit better.
I think that's right. I think that's absolutely right, Wendy. Yeah. I think the complexity of it is you know, in some ways it's so simple, isn't it? You know, it's so simple. You just go outside, you feel better, you know? And in fact, you know, with the pandemic, et cetera, that's been kind of reinforced, that simplicity of like, you're healthier and you feel better if you're outside, you know, and we kind of know that. We just don't do it very much because, you know, for lots of obvious reasons. Our workspaces are often indoors, and, you know, and that's where we have to be in order to do our work. So yeah, it's really interesting seeing some of the complexity in that. And someone like Stephen Westover, who you mentioned as well, you know, these incredible woodmen and woodwomen. He works with his daughter Becky, and you know, he's one of those people that around and about these parts, if you mention woodmen and women, they all reference the knowledge of various kind of leading figures. So Stephen Westover is one of them, for example. And I should mention as well, my good friend Chris Gibson as well, who was brilliant all the way through as this incredible naturalist, incredible knowledge. And I could I would go and ask him about various bits and pieces, and him and Chris and Jude were lovely at kind of guiding me a little in to various aspects of the oak's layering of kind of existence, if you like. They were brilliant for that.
That's great. And there was a friend of yours, Sarah Bevans, is it?
Yeah, that's right.
And she urges you at one moment that if you're to understand an oak, you need to become an oak. And I wondered how close you got to that, and whether that had actually had an impact, had helped at all.
Yeah, I think so. I really do. Sarah's a really kind of amazing person at kind of feeling. She's kind of far more kind of spiritual than me. She's practicing pagan and an extremely intelligent and educated person. And at one point I was sort of saying, "Oh, Sarah, can I talk to you about, the way in which you kind of meditate? You do just occasionally we'll do kind of tree meditations." And we were kind of talking about this, and she would just sort of say to me, "Look, just drop the intellectualizing," and I was kind of like, "Oh, okay." And she was dragging me out of the books and out of the reading and just saying, just feel the tree. And I think it was really good. It was really good advice, if you like.
So we'll overlap a little bit with the modern and perhaps the sort of the older times, and it runs on quite nicely from that. Because you also examine a little bit the role of the green man in sort of Druid mythology, and your own experience. At one point, you have a feeling of something going down the road, which may or may not have been a green man. Can you talk a little bit more about that green man connection? Yeah,
absolutely. I think a number of people will kind of know the notion of the green man and the green woman and the green children, actually. Around these parts in East Anglia, which are these kind of slightly mythical visions of a kind of human kind of dryad connection, a kind of human becoming part of a tree in some way. But the green man figures you see carved in cathedrals, medieval cathedrals all over Europe. Rouen, Ely, Exeter, I seem to remember, in local churches, in a local church just down the road, there's a stunning kind of green man figure. And it's often this kind of foliate version of a kind of human face kind of coming out through leaves. Someone I was speaking to the other day is doing some really interesting work on the green woman as a kind of as a phenomenon as well, because you tend to get these green man figures, but she's doing some work on that, which I find fascinating. And as I say, around these parts, we have this incredible story of the green children of Woolpit.
I had never heard that story before. I thought it was fascinating. Do you want to
this is an account that was written down by a very interesting kind of figure called Ralph of Coggeshall, strangely from just down the road from the Honywood Oak, 13th century account. And he wrote down this story of these two children that had been discovered near the Suffolk village of Woolpit, and they were green and they didn't speak English. They spoke this other language, and they were discovered one day. And I seem to remember the boy doesn't survive, but the girl does, and she lives on, and she eventually learns English and tells this incredible story about how she sort of arrives literally at this site outside the village near the Wolf Pit, which is where the name come from another world, entirely. And this kind of like really kind of strange kind of connection and of kind of folklore and humans and trees and green. And we've seen this with these kind of feral boys and girls that have been uncovered at various times through history, that have kind of been living in woods and stuff. And it's definitely something that kind of fascinates us, I think, as humans. Certainly one morning, kind of a similar time of year, really, where you have slightly more hospitable sunrises. I was out in the field around the back of here, and it was definitely a time, I have to say, it was connected with the time I was doing a lot of this reading about green men, green women, green children, but I definitely saw this green figure, like it was kind of green tinged figure running down the road with long hair. I can kind of picture it, set off the dog over the road, so there was something there. But by the time I went to investigate this figure had gone, but I don't know. I don't know.
I think we all hope it was. I hope it was. I'm just very briefly on this sort of bit of people before we move to the future. You've talked about the Romans and the Druids and how they've all revered the oak in many ways, and to a certain extent worshipped the oak. And then in more modern times, we've looked at the oak for its strength and its beauty and its utility. And I was just thinking, what are future people going to look at? What are the people in 2,000 years going to look back and think of oak? Have you any thoughts on that one?
Well, it's a good thing, isn't it, to be considering. I think the first thing we have to say is that I hope the people of the future are able to look back. And if they do, I think they'll be rather disappointed with the way that we're looking after things at the moment. So we need to ensure a little bit more that we are very much caring for all the ancient oaks that are around, and recognizing that the importance of the ancient oak, as opposed to this process that a lot of people do of kind of slightly greenwashing by saying, oh yeah, we're going to plant lots and lots of little saplings. It's just not the same. There is a specific aspect in which the ancient oak needs to be allowed to live and then die on the same space, and the community to continue to exist in that space. And more and more of the work of people like Susan Simard, etc., that's recognizing these kind of mitochondrial connections, the mycelial linkages that are taking place at a level that we're only starting to understand. So as us as humans need to be recognizing, I think, far more and understanding far more the subtleties of the connections within this woodland world, if you like. That's, I think, really important for the people of the future to be looking back on, or else there will be no ancient trees, there will be no oaks. So it's important to see. And then of course there's the whole issue of the climate emergency and the way in which the various species and various families of trees are responding. Various, as we know, various tree species kind of migrating away from, or as the temperatures change, migrating out of areas over generations. And this is obviously fascinating, slightly terrifying as well. So that in terms of that future world, that will be very interesting.
It is a big question, isn't it, that we need to ask ourselves, is what are we leaving for people to find? But so let's just go back a little bit more to the present. At one point, and you've mentioned the challenges of climate change and the threats that our trees are facing, and oak trees are no different. They're already facing quite a range of diseases. And I think you mentioned that the Honywood Oak is one that had sudden oak disease. Was it sudden oak or acute oak?
Yeah, well, we were worried at one point that it might get that, certainly. Acute oak decline, sudden oak death. These are worrying things.
And I'm hoping you're going to be able to tell me that actually it's in fine health.
Yeah, the Honywood Oak is in very good health at the moment. I'm very pleased to say that largely, I would suggest, because of the care and maintenance of the tree and the kind of haloing effect that has been taken place, where you kind of remove some of the surrounding trees to allow the Honywood Oak a little bit more air and space and light. But yeah, there's a beautifully constructed palisade by Stephen Westover around the tree. Impacting of soils is something that we have to be very aware of around ancient oaks, around ancient trees. And the Marks Hall estate do a fantastic job in terms of, ensuring that the best care and attention is given to this fantastic living being.
So that's and we saw in your pictures that lovely palisade and the space that's been given to the tree, and the care and the love that tree is clearly getting, and the sort of picture of people hand picking seedlings and things. But you also make the point that this is one tree which would have stood among many other trees, and that trees are not by their nature solitary. So its right. Magnificence is almost, is its magnificence enhanced by the fact that it is now alone, and its other compatriots have fallen, not on their own accord, but helped by mankind.
Certainly this was an aspect of the story of the Honywood Oak that that very early on I discovered. Jonathan Jukes told me about, I think about the second time I went there. It might have even been that first time. And he told me that up until, if we'd been standing on that spot around 60 years before, there would have been around 300 other oaks of a similar size and age. I mean, yeah. And and they'd all been cut down, essentially just to raise a kind of cash crop of money, because the estate itself was in a very poor financial state in the late 1950s, and this happened unfortunately a lot across Britain, particularly in England. And this idea of kind of cutting down these ancient trees in order to get some money from them, and then planting these fresh young pines that you could get another crop from. You know, we look back on that. You talk about kind of future looking back. We look back and kind of go, oh, you know, with horror, you know, how can you do that? But yeah, again, there's a kind of message that we have to be careful about our own future worlds. But as you say, this idea of the kind of the lone wonderful oak, or the lone tree on its own, it's a kind of human construct in many ways, and it's not how the trees want to exist. As we know, they have these connections on a kind of root level, that they're all looking after each other. Susan Simard's book, you know, recent book, Finding the Mother Tree, has recognized this idea that within a woodland space, you often have these key trees, like the Honywood Oak would be, the mother trees, throughout which this network of fungal connections is working. So yeah, it's a special tree without a doubt. And it's very interesting that even back in the 1950s, when all these other trees were cut down, the Honywood Oak was kept. Quite exactly why, I kind of go into various possibilities, but it's hard to know exactly why it was kept.
Now we're beginning to run down on time, so I'm going to put two questions to you, which have come in from Keith Kirby. And the first one is, has the publicity given to these trees led to others making a pilgrimage to them? And is there a risk that the special feeling you have around these places could be damaged by their newfound fame?
Well, that's sweet. Yeah, I don't think that there's any genuine danger, in the sense that there is the Honywood Oak in particular is very well looked after, and this has been something that a lot of organisations like the Woodland Trust, etc., who understand trees, recognise that even though we don't mean to, as individual humans, if we're compacting the soil around the tree, we can be impacting and damaging their root systems. So I'm glad to say that with the Honywood Oak, it's very well looked after, and you know, you can happily go and visit, and you can go and get very, you know, pretty close, but respectfully close as well, if you like. And I mean that's a lovely question, but I think there's a sense in which, and I've had this from a number of people that have spoken to me, I think I'm just tapping into something that I'd forgotten about, you know, this kind of sense that we have our favorite trees, and we go and we kind of, you know, touch them when we kind of say hi to them. And often we remember our family, our friends who've also stood by them, if you like, by the same tree. And certainly within the village green idea, you get this, where you often have a single tree that is there that people remember when so-and-so was there. And I think I was just sort of tapping into a bit of that as much as anything. And as you say, there's a kind of much stronger cultural layering to our connections with trees. And what we need to do, to be every now and again, is reminded of this, and reminded both of our connection with all aspects of the natural world, that we are part of the natural world, and that we really should be stepping out of these human constructed spaces and spending time there.
You're bringing me very nicely onto Keith's next question then.
Oh, good.
which is that we venerate old oaks, but there needs to be a succession of younger ones coming out. Inevitably, these rarely have the individuality of the older trees, and therefore have a less of the focus of attention. How do we encourage people to relate to younger trees as well as to veterans? Any thoughts on that one?
Yeah, I think it's all part of the same mix, I would say. I mean, I'm very fortunate here that I live in a very rural, I basically live in a field, and I have a little field here that I kind of look after that's about 2 acres. And there's a number of oaks in there that are various heights up to about 15 years old, some quite a bit older, but certainly in my time of looking after, I find them fascinating. Each tree is remarkably different. And this is, I think, something that, again, we can learn from. Every tree is individual and different. And that seems to me remarkable. And often we just kind of glance across and say, oh, there's a whole group of trees there. Every one is different, every single one, in the same way that every human is different, and this is a beautiful thing to recognize, because as soon as we start to recognize that, we start to look after and we start to care for. I mean, there's wonderful people, for example, I'm thinking of Acorn Vase, who are these wonderful organization in West London that create these beautiful vases, and you can just put an acorn at the top, and you can grow your own tree if you like, and care for your own oak right from that initial stage. So I've heard from various people that have talked about growing oak trees on balconies in flats in London, etc. And places, people like the Woodland Trust are often quite good at making that person then connect with and able to kind of move it to a safer space where it can grow more healthily.
I like the idea perhaps of pointing out to children on a walk, as a young tree, let's look at that one, and let's have that one as our special one when we walk along, something like that. The individuality of the tree is lovely.
Yeah,
now,
absolutely.
James, we've been chatting away and it's been absolutely lovely, but we are beginning to run out of time here.
Sure.
So I'm going to give you a little chance here, because I know that you've obviously, this was not your first book. You've written about British travellers to Arabia. You've written about the Out of Essex, reimagining the literary landscape, and Ancient Wanderings, journeys into prehistoric Britain. And I believe you have another book on the stocks at the moment that is it coming out 2023? Did you say? I think perhaps.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, so we're. It's a book called Grounded, so it's got a lot of natural world material in there, if you like. It's about human connections with landscapes, with places, the ways in which, in a local sense, we connect with various places, and they become somewhere that we might go to, and again find kind of peace and calm, but also they might be the site of a local church, and then if you dig down beneath that, that was also a prehistoric ancient site, etc., etc. Yes, so as I say, and this book's going to come out with Canongate in February 23. Yeah, it's nice. It's
look forward to that one. That sounds fantastic. And just finally, I know you have very kindly said that you'd be very happy to respond to people's questions. And we'll be putting up some social media contacts in a moment, both for us and for you. And I think you've also said you'd quite like to see people's own connections with trees. Is that right?
Yeah, very much.
What sort of things would you like people to send in?
Well, no, I think absolutely. I love when people are able, and I've had over the last year and a half or so since the book's come out, I've had some lovely conversations where people have shared kind of around the world, because the book has gone around the world, which is great. Their favorite local tree, if you like. I always think that's a lovely thing when people say, and often they are not, the ancient oak, but as you say, they might be a small holly tree that's down the end of their garden, and they just always go, they're always keeping an eye out on it, sort of thing. So I love hearing those stories. So if anyone wants to drop me a line through my website, there's an email, and please get in touch through that. I love hearing those stories. I do share various of these kind of tree narratives, if you like, occasionally on Instagram, occasionally on Twitter, and that's a good place for people to kind of also be sort of sharing their tree connections, if you like.
It's wonderful. And thank you so much for today. Thank you so much for your time that you've given us.
Not at all. Thank you.
And we look forward to hearing a few of those maybe from people. So thank you. Thank you very much.
Keep the tree story rolling, I think.
Yeah,
really.
yeah, that's fantastic. Thank you.